gets on. It's on. Hi, everyone. I'm Rich Batanti. I'm the president of ZHF Consulting. Tom Zano and I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome our friends and clients to this virtual discussion. ZHF Consulting is a bipartisan government affairs firm located in Columbus, Ohio, and is wholly owned by Zano Hall & Farron, LLC, a law firm that focuses on tax and government affairs matters. You can learn more about ZHF Consulting by visiting our website at zhfconsulting.com. So today we have an exciting presentation for you, as we have brought together a bipartisan panel of seasoned professionals in Ohio politics to discuss a very timely issue, the November elections. As they say, Ohio is a bellwether state. So it's always an exciting time of year in Ohio and across the country. So the title of our panel discussion today is Prognostications and Punditry, How Capitol Square Insiders See Ohio's Election. Our esteemed panel will discuss all the issues surrounding the upcoming elections, who will win, who will lose, and what it means for Ohio going forward and why. So with that, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. First, we have Betty Montgomery. Betty is the former Ohio Attorney General, Auditor of State, and State Senator. She is an experienced voice in Republican Party politics in Ohio. She is currently an attorney with Mack Murray Schuster Law Firm, and we're glad she's with us today. So thank you, Betty. Also, we have Scott Borgman, longtime political strategist. Currently, Scott is the Senior VP of Advocacy for Ohio Hospital Association. Scott has previously served as Chief Policy Advisor to Governor Bob Taft. He was Chief of Staff to the Ohio House and the Ohio Senate, and he was also CFO for the University of Akron. And then in the private sector, Scott was also a public and government affairs consultant as well. So thank you, Chris, or Scott. Next,
no, you should never confuse the two of us. Please never do that.
I love it. All right, so Chris is currently serves as the chair of the Ottawa County Democratic Party and runs the Redfern Inn and Rocky Point Winery, which is located in Marblehead, Ohio. Chris previously served as chair of the Ohio Democratic Party and as minority leader of the Ohio House of Representatives. We're glad Chris can join us today. Thank you, Chris. Also, we have Ron Obston. Ron is senior advisor with ZHF Consulting and a county commissioner for Wayne County. He is one of the longest-serving Republican members of the Ohio General Assembly, serving in both the Ohio House and Ohio Senate, and most recently as the Ohio House Speaker Pro Tem. So thank you, Ron. And also we have Dan Dodd. Dan is the VP of Government Affairs at ZHF Consulting, and he also serves as president of the Ohio Association of Independent Schools. Dan is also a former Democrat member of the Ohio House of Representatives, and Dan is also an attorney. So thank you, Dan. And then serving as our moderator today is Bo Uten. Bo is president of First Harvest Consulting, business development and public policy firm. Bo has been a longtime political and business consultant in Ohio, advising candidates and businesses on how to navigate the political landscape. So thank you, Bo. Appreciate your help with our panel today.
Sure.
So with that, I'd like to go ahead and thank our panelists again, and then I'll go ahead and turn it over to Bo to get us started for our discussion. So thank you, Bo.
Thanks. Hey, thank you, Rich. I'm glad to be here today. Today, we are going to spend some time looking at Ohio races and work our way up to Congress and the presidential. I'm grateful for our participants today, and I look forward to hearing your succinct and thoughtful answers. Our panelists have their own histories of winning and losing tough campaigns. Both Betty Montgomery and Dan Dodd have won and lost in wave years. Chris Redfern was swept out as ODP chair in the 2014 red wave. Ron Amstutz was in the House leadership during that same wave. And then Scott Borgman ran the Ohio House GOP campaign during the 2006 blue wave. So to start out, I'd like to hear a little bit of what it's like to run a campaign during a volatile election year. And does the present climate bring back any parallels or stories from your own past experiences? And to start off, I'd like to hear from Scott.
Well, Bo, thank you. I always love to remember 2006. It was such a lovely, lovely time in my life. Not only was I providing some strategy and insight in 2006, I actually had drawn the lines 6 years earlier, which were both constitutional and penetratable. So at some point, these years become so bad, the lines don't help. Look, I remember being very actually calm in doing the elections because you could only push back so much against a wave. And the important thing was you tried to build a wall. And, much like you saw in the last presidential election, while the majority was lost in 2006, it wasn't lost by a lot of votes. It was lost by 100 here and 100 there, kind of house seat by house seat. And, as you saw the presidential, kind of won county by county last time, not so much what the national polls said. So, to me, you got to stay calm. One, and two is candidates get really bad and really, hinky in this time of the year. And you got to stay on message, and people don't like this. You got to keep attacking. You've got to keep, when you're on the defensive, you've got to, draw the line, and you've got to stay on message. And, comparative ads work. And so everyone out there that doesn't want to go comparative, if you're on the one side of the wave or the other side of the wave, I would say stay comparative.
Anyone else want to walk down memory lane in terms of any wins or losses or any parallels to today?
2006.
Well, I was on the opposite side of Scott's efforts in 2006, including a very well-known ad that's probably the first and last time I'll ever be on the Daily Show, because the ad was featured on there. I think, comparing 2006 to 2010, in 2006, you feel like in some ways you're along for the ride. And when the wave is going against you, you feel completely and utterly helpless. And I think one of the things that the candidates have to keep in mind, and something they're constantly wrestling with, is even though these campaigns are the most important things in their lives, most people don't know who they are. If you look at a benchmark poll for most House candidates in the election year, even when they're incumbents, their name ID might be 30% if they're lucky. Sometimes it's a little bit higher. So when 65% of likely voters don't know who you are largely helpless, and you're going to get either swept under or ride the wave. And that's what I think a lot of the incumbents and a lot of the candidates who aren't incumbents are trying to tackle. You can only put out so many yard signs. You can only knock on so many doors. Eventually, given the way that voter behavior works, people tend to vote straight ticket. About 90% of them do. And you're in a district where the president is not your friend and is not going to carry that. It could end up being a very long night for you.
Betty?
Well, I was the beneficiary of a wave, and I went from being a top vote getter to being the last to go under the wave. We knew, as you know, weeks before, if actually we knew probably going into the campaign that it was unlikely. It was going to be a very tough year. I think I have to echo what Scott said. It for the candidates, it's all about it. When I ran against an incumbent, Lee Fisher, it was all about making certain that you did the job of a candidate, convince your own party that, yes, I could win, show up, do the job, work hard, and then if the wave comes, you can surf it. And as on the other side, in 2006, it's like you were Velcro to the wave, and you were on the underside, and we stayed above until the last couple of weeks, and then at that point we all know that there was not much we could do. So you just try and you try to stay true to your message, and you try to stay true to yourself.
Right, right. Thanks, Betty. Okay, moving on. We are seeing waves of early voting this year. Democrats do seem to be dominating early voting. Is this a Democrat wave, or are there other explanations for what we are seeing? And what do you expect voting to look like on election day? And I'd like to turn to Chris Redfern for an answer.
Well, I appreciate it. And I always appreciate remembering 2006, 2008, 2012, where Democrats enjoyed great success. And my friend Scott Borgenmeke, who drew that map in 2000, that he drew it for a Republican majority, which was his task. He did not draw it to reflect Ohio's political basis. Because if he did, we would have seen a map similar to 2009, when Steve Driehaus and John Bocherry and Charlie Wilson was reelected, and Zach Space. And you saw, and you will see in this cycle as well, an evening out. Ohioans are not far to the right and they're not far to the left, and the map should reflect that. I suspect the early vote that's occurring right now is enthusiasm. And because that enthusiasm rests on the shoulders of Democrats and those who are inclined to support Democrats, we'll continue to see a massive turnout through early vote and on the day of the election. And there'll be a lot of Republicans the day after who will try to convince Ohioans and Americans that they didn't know Donald Trump, they didn't support Donald Trump, and they will burn all of the pictures of them appearing on the tarmac with Donald Trump. But we have those pictures. We've saved them all. And so going into 2022, there'll be a lot of buyer's remorse from the Republicans and a lot more enthusiasm for the Democrats. I know, I've been there.
Hey, Ron, what do you think of that?
Well, I'll say one thing. Chris is predictable, and I'm not surprised that he would put that spin on his take on the situation. I think it's an unusual year election-wise, and I don't think we're going to be able to parse it out quite as easily as Mr. Redfern has. There's a lot of caustic wind blowing, and so I think a lot of voters, and there is a massive turnout, no question there. How that's going to play out and who's voting for whom is a little less certain, but I think it'll end up being pretty close across the nation, and I wouldn't want to predict which way it's going to go, but I do think the polarization has changed the atmosphere some, and I would say there's both, the enthusiasm that was referred to. I think there's more of a resolute posture that is coming. I think it's on both sides of the aisle. And so those folks are expressing that in different ways, but there's a reason to expect it to be pretty close.
Hey, Bo, can I chime in since?
Of course. Yep.
A couple of things I would note. One is, I think what you're going to see election day, I think there's a lot of, crystal ball reading about what this all means. What you're going to see is the Dem candidates up very early in the night. The Republicans historically have voted later. I'm sure we can all remind ourselves of the DeWine Cordray race when those first things came in at 20 minutes until 8. And I think the number to look at this year is in these early returns is up right about 60%. These early returns, I think you're going to see the Dem candidates will start up top. And then I think you will see kind of an erosion through the night. Where that stops, I think, is the great question. So I always try to tell people what drives me nuts on both sides is that if someone's going to vote on Tuesday and they're going to vote before, a vote's a vote's a vote. Democrats do a very nice job on early votes. I think Republicans are trying to get better, but I look right around that 60%. So that first call, if somebody is extremely higher than 60%, I think it's a pretty good chance that they're going to win. I think the closer they get and lower than 60%, I'd be very sensitive depending on the index and where you are. But I'd be interested to see what Chris or Dan's comments on kind of what to watch election night.
Well, to Scott's point about early vote, Democrats will know by Thursday, the week before the election, whether or not we'll win nationally. Now, they won't tell you, but they will know, because each and every vote and voter is tracked through the course of the early vote and early vote states. So today we know what the targets are in Ohio. We know what they are in Georgia. We know what they are in Florida. And if we don't hit those targets, then we know there's more work to do in the remaining days. Well, when you get to Thursday before the election, you have 3 to 4 days left. You know, a lot of the support is baked, and you can't move more people to the polls. So the work ahead of us is over the course of this week to ensure that we win this November, or this couple weeks from week from Tuesday. But I will tell Ron this. I don't know, Ron, that you and I ever felt as few independents, not Democrat or Republican, but people who are truly undecided, I should say, on the presidential side. Because Donald Trump's a lot of things, but he's a polarizing figure, and he drives your support to him or a lot of people away from him, unlike a John McCain or a Mitt Romney would have in years past.
Okay, let's move on. Well, let's talk about the state house races and the Supreme Court races in Ohio. Considering the top of the ticket and the race at the top of the ticket, some of these state house races are getting tighter. And I'm just curious, Dan, Dodd, are there any tight races that will surprise us at the state house this year?
I would imagine, looking at, the Democrats picked up races in 2018, or picked up seats, I should say. And all of them, those first-time incumbents are on the ballot. I think what they're going to benefit from is the fact that the president is not popular in their district. That's one of the reasons they won in 2018. And there's really nothing that's been done over the past 2 years to indicate that he's increased his suburban support in many of those districts. So I would expect the challengers in those races to have a tough time. You never want to be in a scenario where you are stuck saying that you don't support the top of your ticket, or you don't want to talk about the top of your ticket. You'd rather talk about something else. Even though it's the difference between a federal government and state government, voters are going to want to know how you feel about the president or how you feel about Vice President Biden. And if you're not willing to answer it, or especially in this era of polarization, if you say you don't support the president and you're running as a Republican, you've probably just ticked off a bunch of Republican voters. To the extent that they're paying attention to your race, they may skip you. So I would imagine that those candidates are going to have a very tough time. And I think if you look at the incumbents in those suburban districts who are Republicans, again, I think they're going to have a very tough time. I know several of them personally. They're working hard and they're trying to overcome that. But as all of us on this panel know, the top of the ticket drives everything. And it's very hard to overcome that. In some of these districts, if you're running and the top of your ticket's only getting 42 or 43%.
Any specific races anyone wants to comment on in the state house?
I would comment on any suburban district where there's a female candidate running. I would say that Democrats are going to win 5 to 7, perhaps 8 seats in this cycle. I want to harken back to both 2012 and 2008, 2006. There are going to be people win races in the legislative level we don't know, that we haven't really thought about. And they're going to win because of what Dan Dodd just pointed out and what Ron pointed out. Donald Trump is very popular with 40% of the voters. And even though Scott Borgenminke built districts around 50% of the voters, he knows that the 40% are baked in. It's what you do in the middle. And every day Donald Trump speaks, every day Donald Trump doesn't wear a mask, every day Donald Trump ignores science, every day Donald Trump and his surrogates attack Joe Biden is one more vote, one more suburban vote for the Democratic candidates. Mark my word. And as Lindsey Graham famously said, go ahead and screenshot this and repeat it back to me come election day, because I think this is a lot like 2008 in terms of a wave, and there's not much people can do about it in some of these districts. People will lose races come the first Tuesday in November, not because of what they may or may not have done at the local level. It would be because of Donald Trump at the top of the ticket.
You don't get to have it both ways, that the maps work against you, and then in wave years that don't build a year. So, either way will work. But you got to kind of pick one side or the other. Either the map's against you and it's going to block you, but look, I do think it's a tough year out there. I do think it's a tough year out there. I am not as convinced that the losses are as big as people say. I don't see a ton of money being spent, and I do think, and Dan Dodd brings up a good point. I think there are very few ticket splitters, but for those people that are known. I do think if you go through and you vote for, you vote for Joe Biden, but Laura Lanise, I do think there's going to be some people that'll do that. Vice versa, if you voted for Trump, but your Dem state rep, I think some of those people are going to get through. And quite frankly, all of these House seats, we act like everybody knows what's going on. These seats sometimes are won by 150 to 350 votes, and none of us, quite frankly, are smart enough to know where those are going to land.
And the earlier comment about it's all driven from the top, I take a little different view. I think in the legislative races, all politics is really local. And it surprised me that some consistently blue districts 4 years ago not only went for Donald Trump, they elected legislators who are Republican. And I'd say some of the statements that have been made need to be countered with maybe there's some truth to those, but the other side of the aisle is also got a whole different set of dynamics. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how those folks that liked I'm from the outside disruptive presidential candidate might just continue to like him a lot. And again, I think the fact that they've gotten to know their local legislators who are in office, there's a lot of inertia there, a lot of inertia. And so, yes, there'll be some changes, but I don't think they're going to be as wholesale as maybe I would have guessed if I had to guess a year ago.
Well, Ron, with all due respect, I do think that you can't discount that the top of the ticket drives turnout. And while the Republicans have an enthusiastic base that won't, as the president presciently commented, I could somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and it won't make a difference. I think you cannot discount the fact that the top of the ticket drives turnout. So we've got early voting as much because of enthusiasm as well as the pandemic. And so trying to sort that out, I think it's a very close race. And at the national level, and I do think that it will make a difference on the legislative races in those, because as Scott said, so many of these races are won by a handful of votes. And so hopefully you've done even if you've done a really good job, if you've done a good job, people will ticket split. But I think if in the next 2 weeks, whoever hasn't voted, if there's something that happens that just blows the lid off of people angrier, if that's possible, there may be just, I'm sorry, I am done with this. I'm just doing straight tickets to throw the bums out.
Yeah.
Can I build on what Betty said? Because I recall Betty Montgomery attending parades all across the 2nd Senate District. And when she ran against L.V. Perkins
I love him.
a few years ago. And Betty has a twin sister. And so when Betty couldn't do a parade, we all knew that she would send her sister. And Betty was known in Wood County not only as the first female prosecutor ever to be elected, and one of the few ever in the state of Ohio, even to this day. She was known to go door to door in places like Rossford and Walbridge and Lake Township, which are Democratic-leaning areas, because she knew the power of personality. Because of COVID, candidates like Betty Montgomery at the legislative level cannot reinvent themselves or introduce themselves to voters because they can't go door to door, because they won't go door to door, and because parades and festivals and those kinds of community gatherings have all been canceled. Point. And so Ron, I don't, as a former legislator, Ron, I understand the most important conversations are between the screen door. But if you show up in Genoa, Ohio today and try and knock on doors, people think you're crazy because you're going to try and give them COVID. And so that has thrown a blanket on everything as it relates to incumbent legislators, again, in their first or second term, that continue to have to invent and reinvent and reintroduce themselves. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen unless you're in a very, very conservative district where the use of masks is somehow seen as unpatriotic or anti-American or some weirdness.
Well, but that cuts both ways, and it gives more plausibility to my point that the inertia of the incumbent, even if they are a first or second termer, is going to tend to be an advantage to them over and against the opponent who's trying to get more name recognition.
Unless it wasn't a wave election. This is a wave election. You're going to be taken under. Northern Franklin County will never be represented by a Republican again. It just won't. Southern Delaware County in 2 cycles, the same. You cannot control the mindset of voters, especially when the standard bearer is a racist, is somebody who uses language that makes people like Betty Montgomery shake. Look, it just doesn't happen. This is not Mitt Romney or John McCain or George Bush. Donald Trump is not the standard bearer that will win in Northern Franklin County, Northern Wood County. He won't win the city of Bowling Green. Betty can tell you that. He won't win the city of Fremont. Betty will tell you that.
I don't think he'll win Wood County, to be honest with you.
Okay,
right, and because of that, you have candidates that may win and defeat an incumbent in his first term, and Wood County is the example.
Let's move on to the Ohio Supreme Court races. We'll talk more about the presidential in a minute for sure. But we have 2 very important Ohio Supreme Court races up this year. And in fact, if for some reason the Democrats would win, it's a blue wave, the Supreme Court would actually go to the more liberal ideology of running the court versus the more conservative. We have Bruner versus French, and we have Kennedy versus O'Donnell. French and Kennedy have been good justices on the court, I believe, and they have a fight ahead of them. So I guess I would just ask Betty, how do you think these races are going to fare in light of everything else we're talking about today?
I think that Judy and Karen obviously have a very tough race for a couple of reasons. One of which is what Chris just said. Nobody knows who their judges are generally, except those of us that are watching this, who are on this, most of the folks don't know who their judges are. And they can't go introduce themselves in the way that they traditionally, they can't go to large groups. They can't go to the Rotaries and the Kiwanis and the pumpkin show the way that they could before. So I think it's going to be very hard. I do think that you see that both of them are up now on television trying to establish in a way that may get them over the line, but it's going to be I think very close. The O wins it generally, and Judy doesn't have an O in front of her name, but there's a certain compatibility about her she's up on television, and that may get her, hopefully, in my opinion, get her across the line.
I think a lot of it is going to probably, when you look at how these races have gone in the past, we're all familiar with Bill O'Neill winning, despite spending no money, as he will tell you repeatedly ad nauseum that he spent no money and how he doesn't like to spend money, and money shouldn't be involved in judges' races. But I think that the problem that I think the incumbent justices are going to have is that typically, I think, even if the president were to win Ohio, and I think my prediction early is that he's probably going to. Mm-hmm. The problem with a lot of his voters is that they love him. the rest of them, rest of the Republicans, they don't necessarily care all that much about. When you get down to a Supreme Court race where their partisan affiliation isn't even on the ballot, I think those candidates are going to have a difficult time, the judicial candidates, whereas I think on the Democratic side, you have many more people who are dedicated to electing Democrats. And that's where I think this really kind of boils down to. Democratic voters are showing up to vote for Democrats. There's a lot of Trump voters who are showing up to vote for Trump. The rest of them, I don't think they care that much about, and I don't think they care enough to figure out who the Republicans and the Democrats are who are running for the Supreme Court. So I think this is one of those rare cases where the sample ballot's going to help a lot, and I think Democrats are probably going to use those a lot more than the Republicans are. Sharon Kennedy has the last name Kennedy, which is good, and I think that's going to help her. But I would expect the races to split. I would expect Judge Brunner to win, and I would expect Justice Kennedy to get reelected.
It's if to build upon what Dan just said. Remember when John Husted stood on the tarmac and held up a mask and said, "We all have to wear a mask," and was roundly booed? This is the party that John and Mike DeWine and too many my Republican friends have built. From the yelling and screaming of the Tea Party, it's evolved into Donald Trump. And with all due respect, Donald Trump folks who were going to, as Dan just said, get so motivated and so aggravated with their plight that they would embrace the racist language of Donald Trump. They don't care who their county commissioner is, let alone their state senator. And 5 to 7 seats for the state house, probably 2 in the state senate, a member of Congress, and a Joe Biden win in Ohio of 2 points. That does not seem too far of a reach for me as somebody who's been in a wave and somebody who's had to push the wave back. I see this coming, and because the support is so baked in, I'm not sure there's a lot that can be done to hold that wave back over the course of the next 9 days, 10 days, 12 days.
Well, that speech doesn't apply to the Supreme Court races, but it's a good speech. Thank you, Ron.
Well, I look, I think Republicans do wear masks. I think many people do take this seriously. I think, and again, I don't know about this court race. I don't know where these are going to land. What I do think is the process is flawed for these Supreme Court races. I mean, you've just had every panelist, whether it's a split person or whether it's a partisan issue, you've got 4 people who clearly take their career seriously, take being a just very seriously. And we've all just in some way, shape, or form, nobody knows who they are, and it's kind of a crapshoot. So no matter how this ends up, I do think we have to figure out a little bit better way, whether it's partisan identification, whatever it is. But you've got 4 people, and really everyone on the panel, it's either going to be a waiver election. It's not going to have anything to do with anything else. I think that's very unfortunate, and something over the next 10 years, I think Ohio needs to look at how we do these races. Because, whether you like them or don't like them, they're good, smart people who the law means a lot to them. And so they've just thrown their kind of career and fate up to kind of a little bit of a randomness.
It sounds like you trying to get into heaven, Scott Borgeminke.
I've been in the other place for far too long, sitting next to you. I mean,
I don't know. I know you know this, but Jennifer Brunner served as Secretary of State, and she has been a voice about, in this case, voting rights, for instance, for 2 decades, 3 decades. She was an election lawyer. So when she's elected to the Supreme Court, she'll continue to lead and be a voice for families on the highest court. And the same with Judge O'Donnell, who's one of the leading judges in the state's largest common pleas bench up here in Cleveland. So whomever wins, I would put my lot in with Judges Brunner and O'Donnell, and I look for their success because of what Dan Dodd said. There's probably 20 million sample ballots right now being distributed across Ohio when you count both federal, state, local races. And that will have an impact this cycle for sure.
Mr. Chairman, it sounds like we got you on video loop from 2018. I don't know if you have a lag or not.
I did not do this in 2018. I've known for my predictions, and I'll stand by them. I suspect there's going to be a good year for the people of the state who are represented by Democrats. And I think, again, with all due respect to everyone who believes differently, your opinions matter, not as much as mine, but they matter. I do believe that Donald Trump's position on things like race motivate voters, and not African American voters. That's parochial, not Latinos, not people of color, but white women and live in the suburbs who say, this is enough. We've had enough of that language. And as I see Betty's head nodding, it takes great courage to stand up to your party and say, Donald Trump is a bridge too far. I'll support my local legislator. I'll support my local county commissioner, but I can't support somebody who embraces the language of the Proud Boys and the Ku Klux Klan. 545 children are still separated from their parents and living in cages along the border, and that's not even the big story of the day. If you live in southern Delaware County, Wood County, these suburban areas, you've had enough.
So Betty, thanks for that, Chris. I know that Chris gave a good ad for Jennifer Bruner. What would you say about some of the qualifications of the Republicans, the incumbent Republican court justices?
Well, I have to tell you, Judy worked for me for years. I watched her in the Supreme Court give one of the, if not the best argument I have ever heard by any lawyer in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, that actually leaned in to listen and didn't interrupt in a quiet, studied way without notes. And I've known her for years. She is one of the most talented lawyers I have ever had the opportunity and the honor to work with. Sharon Kennedy is a scrapper. I will never count her out. Here's a gal, as a police officer, decided she was going to go to law school, and she went to, as I recall, at night. But at any rate, nobody thought she could win the Supreme Court race, and she worked her tail off. So I will tell you, I will never count out either one of these people. I think they're going to have a tough race, but I think the Republicans learned from last election cycle how important these sample ballots are. We did not give sample ballots in a lot of the counties because we had this algorithm that said, well, we're not going to send things. We're not sending things to hard R's, folks who traditionally vote Republican. But they forgot that the judges on the ballots, whether it's local or federal or state, don't have a partisan R or D behind their name. And as a result, we lost two good Supreme Court justices. And this year, the Republicans have learned that. Unfortunately, they learned it the hard way. So I would never count either one of them out. The races, however, are going to be, I think, very difficult just because of, as illuminated by every one of these panelists who have talked.
Yep. Let's move on to Congress. I know that we've talked a lot about the ballooning of the suburbs. We know that there's, you look at Eastern Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, that's now Trump country. There are a lot of unknowns. When we look at Ohio congressional races and we look at the Senate races across the country, and even the House races across the country, any how do you say that? I can't say that word.
Prognostication.
Prognostication. You may need another moderator because of that word, prognostication, or predictions, as we look at some of these races in Congress this year. I thought it'd be good to start out with Ronnie and Stubbs on that question.
Well, I'll take what I said earlier as in terms of inertia for the incumbents and multiply that in the case of the Congress. I think, the trend has been across the nation that the incumbents have a tremendous advantage. And I think they'll even have more so this time because of the environment with the difficulty in campaigning. So I think there'll be a lot of stability. We might lose a seat because of the census that's wrapping up, but that's a different story.
Anyone else want to comment on the congressional?
Yeah, I don't think I would cede Western Pennsylvania, for instance, to the Republicans. There's a couple members of Congress representing Allegheny County, Pittsburgh, and parts of Western Pennsylvania. And as we know, the map in Ohio is drawn so it doesn't give much. Now at the legislative level, because you have 99 House seats, for instance, there's a little give and take there. But when you only have 18 members of Congress, 16 members of Congress, it's very difficult for a Democrat to unseat a Republican. That tells you how historic it's going to be when Steve Chabot loses down in Cincinnati, and why you see him flailing about right now in that Hamilton County district. I do know that because of the way we're going to redraw congressional districts, as you recall, a few years ago, we passed a new addition to the Constitution of the state to redraw congressional districts. I recall Scott may have been involved in that. There is some level of fairness going to be reinstated in this process in 2022. I think that's the case, right, Scott?
Well, I defer to you, as you know, I defer to you on what the process is going to be. I won't be involved in it. I did that once in my lifetime, and I still see my psychiatrist because of it. I think part of what's going to happen is Ohio's going to lose a seat most likely, and so whether the process changes because the process changes or because the seats actually just get physically bigger. At some level, just the seats getting bigger, the math makes it so the districts kind of become a little more balanced. I do give you, you are a determined person. No one who's watching this is going to remember, but we used to go after a guy named Jerry Lubers for years and years.
Yeah, that's right.
And we could get to 48% against Jerry Lubers in a second. And then we'd spend $1 million and we never got above 48% against Jerry Lubers. Chabot's it's the same region. It's the same area. Chabot's going to hold on despite what people think down there. But there's certain areas where you've got these ceilings and you feel so good about the poll numbers and you're a sucker and you dump all your money in it and you walk out with the same percentage you started with.
Do you think, though, that the demographics have changed in Chabot's district so much that we know he's had three difficult election cycles? Are the demographics so dramatically changed that that might color the way you comment on that?
So I'll start and then I'll turn it over. My ancestry is from there through both 23andMe and Ancestry.com. And Betty, we've been drinking wild turkey down there for Thanksgiving for years and years and years, and they're still drinking wild turkey down there. And so I think the demographics have changed and things have softened a little bit, but I think the core of that district is still West Side Cincinnati. It's hard to beat Chabot.
Wild turkey, huh, Scotty? He's going to lose by 3 points, probably going away. And Warren County, as you know, is part of your ancestral homeland, is a Republican county, safely a Republican county, but so ideologically, especially in the southern part of the county, where, like Delaware County, like Northern Franklin County, it's the same song repeated. There's erosion in the Republican base because of Donald Trump. And that will mean, in this case, that the Democrat will pick up that first House district down in Cincinnati. And I suspect there'll be a lot of closer races across the state. You may recall when Steve Driehaus won in 2008 and John Bocherry won in 2008. Those were very, very close margins, as you pointed out with state house races. So the same could be said in a lot of other, or not a lot, probably 2 other congressional districts where the margins will be a lot closer than we anticipated.
I actually agree with Chris, probably not surprisingly, but I think that I think down in Cincinnati, I think Steve Chabot is going to have a tough time, and I think he's probably going to come up short. I think when you look at the demographics and the shift, and I think it's important for us to remember why redistricting is so important, is because you have the opportunity once for the next 10 years to draw the maps to fit the political realities at the time you're drawing the maps. Right now, we are at the end of that lifespan for the map that was drawn in 2011. If you think about it, that was 4 speakers of the House ago. We've had 4 speakers since that map was drawn, since those maps were drawn.
27 indictments ago. 27 indictments.
So there a lot has changed, and I think when you look at the demographics down there, Butler County and Warren County and Southwest Ohio, west side of Hamilton County, they're still Republican, but they're not as Republican as they were. Certainly not under the current president and the way that those demographic trends are going. And I think Kate Schroeder down there is a great. I've known her back since I was in law school, working for now Mayor Cranley, and I think that she has a great life story and a great campaign going, and I think she's going to have what it takes to win down there narrowly.
I love how my friends on the opposite side of the aisle always point out the first congressional district. I have to remind them that Indiana and Kentucky cannot be drawn in, despite the way they like to draw a fair district. You can't draw those in, so there's not a lot of way to draw down there. So either you want to draw it east or west, or you want to draw it north or south, but one's not any more constitutional than the other.
Hey, oddly enough, House Bill 6, though, funds a coal plant in southern Indiana, though, right, Scott? So when the legislature's really up for it, they'll come up with a way to do anything, won't it?
Indiana and Kentucky will be in play, I'm sure. And if you'd like to talk about Western PA, we can bring those guys in too and draw that in if we want to go over lines.
I want to share something I read the other day, and then I want to ask a question from the audience before we move on our prepared questions. Interesting, in Florida, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, new voter registrations are 2-to-1 Republican to Democrat, which I found that very interesting when I keep hearing this erosion of Republican base. Some may be leaving, but I think a lot are coming and joining the Republican Party as well. A quick question from the audience. What are the predictable challenges in certifying election results? What do you think of that? What do you think the challenges are, Scott?
I mean, look, I've fought this for a long time, and I'm sure this will draw ire. I believe challenging elections on all sides, whether it be the Democrats on, a couple years ago they did, sometimes the Republicans do this time. I believe this is a voter turnout issue and not a real problem on either side. I believe that what you've seen and what the problems that you're having is these issues have become driving in your base, whether it's R or D. Look, this process works pretty well. It is complicated. Could it work better? Of course it could work better, but I never bought that this is a huge fraudulent situation on the right or the left. But what I do buy is that the right or the left has different benefits to turn out their voters. I think this election, the election 2 years ago, this is not about real persuasion issues or about real fraud. This is about, hey, if you don't show up, someone's going to cheat you and screw you over, so you better get out to vote. So I really don't believe, and I know the Democrats have made them too, I just don't believe that these issues are real issues. I believe they're scare tactics on one party or the other party to get out and vote.
Let's talk about polling, especially when we look at the presidential. We all know that the races we just discussed will be eminently influenced by the top of the ticket. So let's look at 2016 first. So during the 2016 election, polling had Clinton winning in Ohio in early October. But by mid-October, you began to see the numbers tighten, and heading into early voting and election day, some polls were tied or favored Trump slightly. No one predicted Trump's solid win in Ohio, and in fact, he won Ohio by 8.13 point margin. Now in 2020, Biden's lead, according to several polls, was larger in early October, but as the races are wont to do, the polls are tightening with Biden or Trump in the lead, depending upon the poll. It seems that polls are often missing the mark nowadays as compared to the election results that we see in the end. Is this true? And if so, what's changed in our process where we see polls being less and less accurate? I'd like to start with Chris Redfern on this question.
Well, if you look at the Trump margins, you were right. It's bigger than a lot of people anticipated. What I'd like to reflect on is the total percentage of his vote, and the fact that he is retreating from, in this case, 51% of the vote. He's retreating from that in Ohio, closer to his base. You know, we're all elected, or those of us who've been candidates are elected our base, and by those in the middle to get to 50% plus one. And you can't win in Ohio if you just depend on Republicans alone or Democrats alone. So you depend on the soft middle. And every day Donald Trump engages the voters during this campaign, he's losing more and more of the middle. And unlike Hillary Clinton, the Republican Party has not spent the previous 40 years attacking Joe Biden. So there's not much, to Donald Trump's chagrin, and Rudy Giuliani. Last I saw, he was on a hotel bed with Barack's actress friend. Lest we forget that Hillary Clinton in emails, nothing came of it. But the lock her up chant, coupled with 40 years of attacks, meant that Hillary Clinton was doomed in a lot of these states where she did not have a base of support as strong to resist it. Joe Biden is different from that. That's why, and polling is difficult today because it doesn't reflect all of those kinds of issues. And the basic way we poll, telephone, is difficult too.
You know, and one thing to keep in mind, the difference between 2016 and 2020, when you look at the polling averages, Secretary Clinton had, leads in many of these states, but her percentages were never above 50. She was polling at 46, 47%, and Trump was polling at 42, 43%. And as Chris mentioned, when you have somebody who's been attacked essentially since 1992, and demonized in some ways, those negatives are going to catch up with you. And you look at her favorability and unfavorability ratings. They weren't as bad as Trump's, but they weren't good. And Vice President Biden's favorability numbers are a lot better, and his polling average is a lot higher as well. So the gap may be the same, but he's polling at 51, 52, 53%, 54% in some of the swing states. So what you're seeing are many fewer undecided voters. And you are also seeing that when you look at undecided voters and those people who don't like either candidate, in 2016, they went with Trump. In 2020, they are going, according to the polling, with Vice President Biden. And that's going to make a big difference. The vice president's also polling very well with seniors. All of us on this panel know that seniors show up to vote, always. So when you have a dependable set of voters and you are polling very well with them, much higher than what a normal Democratic candidate would expect to poll with them, typically, nationally, they're going to do very well.
But Bo, I've got a couple thoughts. One, I believe the polls. I've always believed the polls. To me, what people miss is it's easy to pick up the phone or to answer a survey, but to vote, the turnout model. So somewhere between where the polls are and the turnout model. I bet horses every weekend, and people forget. My racing form tells me the exact results. If the racing form had a plus or minus error of 3 lengths, which these polls do. These are not your cholesterol numbers. These are margin of errors numbers. You know, it would be harder to handicap a horse race. So I buy the polls, and I buy what Dan Dada said too about getting over 50%. I think that really does matter. And I think averages do matter. It's also why I think Trump wins Ohio, because Biden has not quite gotten over that 50% margin in Ohio. Maybe he has in some other states, but that's another one. I agree with all those premises, but it's also why I think Trump just gets over the line, and I think he gets over the line in Ohio because he has not broken that 50% barrier.
Okay. final question here before we wrap up. I want quick answers because I want to get everybody in. We really promised people we'd keep this to an hour, and I want to respect that. But who do you think is going to win the presidential in November and why? Let's start with Ron Amstutz.
Well, I think there's a lot of voters who aren't talking, and I think a lot of those are going to vote for Trump, and I think he's going to win. So that's just my prediction.
Okay. Dan Dodd.
I think President Trump wins Ohio but loses nationally. I would expect the Vice President Biden to get over 300 electoral votes.
Okay. Betty.
I think Trump has a much narrower path to victory in the electoral college as well as the national vote. And I think Trump probably will narrowly win Ohio, and I think Biden will win narrowly.
How about you, Chris?
I think Joe Biden wins the presidency, wins 335 electoral votes or more, and I think he wins Ohio by 2 points.
Okay. Who have I not called on yet?
I will. I'm going to take the cop out because I'll tell you what. The one thing I learned last time, I thought Hillary Clinton was going to win. I was wrong. I proved to myself that I don't know a damn thing about Michigan or North Carolina or Pennsylvania or Florida. And so at the end of the day, I know about Ohio. I think he wins Ohio, but I am just not smart enough to know what's happening in 7 to 12 counties in this country that could break this election. So I'm going to take a brave pass.
Boo, boo.
Hey, this has been really fun today. I just thank each of you for taking time. This is a wealth of wisdom on this call, and a wealth of diverse wisdom and experience. So thank you for sharing your views. And I love the banter. It's always good to fight. It brings out the best in us. So thanks again. And I'm going to turn it over to Rich Batanti to wrap it up.
Thanks, Bo.
Great. Thanks, Bo. Appreciate that. And also like to go ahead and thank our panelists again. I think you guys did a great job. And I'd also like to thank our viewers as well. You know, we had a great dialogue today, as Bo said, and I know I learned a lot. And always fun and entertaining when you get this group together. They are the true experts in this area. So thank you again. And to our viewers, you know, please let us know if you have any questions or concerns, or if we can be of any assistance to you on any future issues. You know, we're here to help any way we can. And again, please see our website for details about us. Thanks again, and have a great rest of your day. And don't forget to vote. Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you.